Wyoming Territory, 1875. The first snowfall of winter descended in lazy flakes, blanketing the rugged landscape of the Tetons in pristine white. Ethan O'Brien surveyed his herd with a furrowed brow, counting each cow with practiced efficiency. 20 years old and already sole proprietor of the Whispering Pine Ranch, he wore responsibility like an ill-fitted coat, necessary but uncomfortable. The bitter wind nipped at his cheeks, but he barely noticed, having grown accustomed to Wyoming's harsh embrace. "Mr. Hanson says another blizzard's coming," his ranch hand, Thomas, reported, reining his horse alongside Ethan's. "Might be the worst one in years." Ethan nodded grimly. "We'll move the herd to the southern pasture before sundown. The ridge will block the worst of it." His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. As they rode back toward the ranch house, Ethan's gaze drifted to the distant horizon where gray clouds gathered like an advancing army. The vast emptiness of his land stretched before him, 3,000 acres of beautiful desolation. He'd inherited it all 2 years ago when influenza had claimed both his parents within a week of each other, leaving him alone with a deed, a mortgage, and 12 hired hands looking to him for leadership. Ethan believed what his father had taught him: a rancher stands alone, depends on no one, shows no weakness. The frontier forgave neither vulnerability nor hesitation. He'd buried his grief beneath endless work, dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. The ranch had prospered under his determined management, but his heart had hardened like the Wyoming earth during drought. "A man needs nothing but his land and his own 2 hands," he muttered to himself, repeating his father's mantra. Yet on nights when the wind howled against his window, Ethan sometimes wondered if there might be more to life than survival. He had almost reached the ranch house when he spotted a peculiar shape on the northern ridge, a small, dark figure struggling against the increasing snowfall. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Thomas, do you see that?" The ranch hand squinted. "Looks like someone's out there. Fool's gonna freeze to death in this weather." Ethan hesitated only briefly before turning his horse. "Get the men started on moving those cattle." "I'll check it out." As he galloped toward the ridge, the figure became clearer, someone on foot, stumbling through snow that had already accumulated to knee-height. The traveler wore a long coat that whipped violently in the wind. When Ethan was 20 yards away, the figure collapsed. He dismounted in a fluid motion, boots crunching through the crusty surface of the snow. Kneeling beside the fallen traveler, Ethan gently turned them over to reveal the face of a young woman, her lips blue with cold. Long auburn hair spilled from beneath a woolen cap, and her face, though pale from exposure, was striking in its delicate features. "Miss, can you hear me?" Ethan patted her cheek lightly. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer grass. "Help," she whispered, the word barely audible above the wind. Without hesitation, Ethan lifted her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt. He maneuvered her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, supporting her slumped form against his chest. As he urged his horse toward the ranch house, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what kind of woman traveled alone in such treacherous conditions. By the time they reached the ranch house, the storm had intensified. Mrs. Fletcher, his housekeeper, gasped when Ethan carried the unconscious woman through the door. "Good heavens." "Who is she?" "Found her half frozen on the north ridge," Ethan explained, laying the woman gently on the sofa near the fireplace. "Get her out of these wet clothes. I need to help the men with the cattle." As he turned to leave, Mrs. Fletcher caught his arm. "The men can handle the cattle. This girl needs tending, and I'm not strong enough to move her myself." Ethan hesitated, torn between duty to his ranch and the mysterious woman who'd stumbled into his life. Finally he nodded. "I'll help, but then I have to go." Together they removed the woman's sodden outer garments. Beneath her traveling coat, she wore a simple blue dress, now damp with melted snow. Her hands were red and chapped from cold. "Poor thing," Mrs. Fletcher murmured, wrapping a quilt around the woman's shoulders. "Wonder what she was doing out there all alone." "We'll find out when she wakes," Ethan replied, his voice neutral despite his curiosity. He built up the fire while Mrs. Fletcher prepared hot tea and broth. The woman stirred as warmth returned to her limbs. Her eyes opened fully, darting around the unfamiliar room before settling on Ethan with a mixture of confusion and wariness. "You're safe," he assured her, keeping his distance. "My name is Ethan O'Brien. This is my ranch, Whispering Pine. I found you in the snow." She struggled to sit up, wincing. I'm Olivia. Olivia Caldwell. Her voice was soft but clear, with an Eastern accent that immediately marked her as an outsider. Thank you for saving my life, Mr. O'Brien. What were you doing out there alone? Ethan asked, unable to hide his disapproval. Color returned to her cheeks, though whether from the warmth or indignation, he couldn't tell. The stagecoach driver refused to continue because of the weather. He said Thornville was just over the ridge, but I must have taken a wrong turn. Thornville is 15 miles east, Ethan said, frowning. You would have frozen to death. Olivia Caldwell, now that Ethan could see her properly, appeared to be about 22 years old. Her auburn hair, drying in the heat from the fire, fell in waves past her shoulders. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. I realize that now, she replied, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Fletcher with a grateful smile. I'm usually more sensible, but I was desperate to reach town before nightfall. What business brings you to Wyoming Territory, Miss Caldwell, Mrs. Fletcher asked, settling into her rocking chair. A shadow passed over Olivia's face. I've come to teach at the new school in Thornville. The blizzard howled outside, rattling the windows. Ethan glanced toward the door, thinking of his men and the cattle. You won't be going anywhere tonight, Miss Caldwell, he said firmly. The storm's getting worse. We'll get you to Thornville when it passes. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. It's common sense. Ethan's tone brooked no argument. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on my herd. He donned his coat and hat, glad to escape the strange tension that had filled the room. Outside, the snow swirled in blinding sheets, but Ethan welcomed the sting of it against his face. It was easier than confronting the unfamiliar warmth he'd felt when Olivia Caldwell's green eyes had met his. The storm lasted 3 days. Ethan spent most of that time in the barn and with the herd, avoiding the ranch house where his unexpected guest recovered. When he did come inside for meals or sleep, he maintained a polite distance, answering Olivia's questions with brief responses that discouraged further conversation. Yet he couldn't help noticing things about her, the way she insisted on helping Mrs. Fletcher with household tasks despite being a guest, how she'd brought books in her small traveling trunk and read by the fire in the evenings, the gentle way she spoke to everyone from Thomas to the youngest stable boy. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan found her standing on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Her hair was neatly braided, and she wore the same blue dress, now clean and pressed. It's beautiful, she said without turning, somehow knowing it was him. I've never seen anything like it. Ethan stood beside her, keeping a respectable distance. Where are you from, Miss Caldwell? Boston, she replied, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. But I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a professor at the university there. That's a long way from Wyoming. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Yes. About as far as one can get. What made you come all this way to teach in a frontier town? The question had been bothering him since she'd arrived. Olivia's smile faded and she looked away. Sometimes one needs to leave the past behind to find a future. The cryptic answer only increased Ethan's curiosity, but he didn't press. Everyone on the frontier had stories they preferred not to tell. I'll take you to Thornville today, he said instead. The roads should be passable now. Something like disappointment flickered across her face before she composed herself. Thank you, you've been very kind. Ethan almost laughed at that. Kind was not how most people would describe him. Efficient, perhaps, responsible, but not kind. They set out mid-morning in Ethan's wagon. Mrs. Fletcher had packed a basket of food for Olivia and insisted on including a quilt in case the weather turns. The journey to Thornville would take 3 hours in good conditions, longer with the snow-covered roads. For the first hour, they rode in companionable silence. Ethan found himself stealing glances at his passenger, noting how the winter sunlight caught the red highlights in her hair. She seemed lost in thought, her green eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Have you always been a rancher, Mr. O'Brien? She asked suddenly. The question startled him. Yes, my father built Whispering Pine from nothing. I was born there. You must love it very much. Ethan considered this. Love wasn't a word he associated with ranching. Duty, responsibility, necessity, these were his motivations. It's my home, he said finally, my legacy. But is it what you would have chosen, Olivia persisted, if you could have been anything? No one had ever asked him that before. I never thought about it. The ranch was always my future. Everyone should have a choice, she said softly, even if they choose what was already before them. They crested a hill and the small settlement of Thornville came into view below, a church steeple, a main street lined with wooden buildings, scattered houses on the outskirts. There's your new home, Ethan said, nodding toward the town. Olivia's expression was unreadable as she surveyed the frontier settlement. Yes, I suppose it is. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with fresh paint and a small bell tower. Next door was a modest cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop outside. That must be the teacher's residence, Olivia said, gathering her things. A stout woman emerged from the cabin, waving excitedly. You must be Miss Caldwell. We thought you might have been caught in the storm. I was fortunate, Olivia replied, gesturing to Ethan. Mr. O'Brien rescued me and provided shelter until the weather cleared. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Wilson, head of the school board. After thanking Ethan profusely, she ushered Olivia toward the cabin, chattering about the 16 students eagerly awaiting their new teacher. Ethan remained in the wagon, suddenly reluctant to leave. Olivia turned back just before entering the cabin. Thank you again, Mr. O'Brien, she called, for everything. He tipped his hat in acknowledgement, then flicked the reins. As he drove away, Ethan told himself he was glad to return to the predictable routine of his ranch. Yet the long ride home felt emptier than he expected. The following weeks brought an unusually mild January, allowing Ethan and his men to repair fences damaged during the blizzard. He threw himself into work with even more dedication than usual, rising before dawn and retiring well after dark. If Mrs. Fletcher noticed his increased industry, she said nothing. One morning in early February, Thomas brought news from town. Mail's come in, he announced, handing Ethan several envelopes. And everyone's talking about the new schoolteacher. Apparently, she's got those wild shepherd boys sitting quiet and learning their letters. Ethan grunted noncommittally, though his heart beat a little faster at the mention of Olivia. He'd thought of her often since their parting, remembering snippets of conversation, the graceful way she moved, her thoughtful questions. Mrs. Fletcher said to remind you about the Founders' Day social this Saturday, Thomas continued. The whole town'll be there. Ethan had forgotten about the annual celebration commemorating Thornville's establishment. Usually, he made a brief appearance out of obligation to his status as one of the area's principal landowners, then returned to the ranch as quickly as possible. I have too much work, he began, but Thomas cut him off. Begging your pardon, boss, but you haven't had a day off in months. The men and I can handle things for one evening. That Saturday, Ethan found himself driving to Thornville against his better judgment. He'd bathed and shaved with unusual care, and wore his one good suit, which felt stiff and constraining after his daily attire of work shirts and denim. The town hall was transformed for the occasion with paper lanterns and ribbon decorations. A small band played in the corner while couples danced in the center of the room. Tables laden with food lined the walls, surrounded by chatting townspeople. Ethan had just accepted a cup of punch when he saw her. Olivia stood across the room, laughing at something Mrs. Wilson had said. She wore a simple dress of deep green that complemented her eyes, and her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Several men hovered nearby, clearly waiting for an opportunity to approach her. Before Ethan could decide whether to greet her, Mayor Thompson cornered him with questions about cattle prices and railroad expansion. By the time he extricated himself, Olivia was dancing with the town's young doctor. Ethan found himself watching her throughout the evening, noting how her face lit up when she spoke with her students and their parents, how gracefully she moved across the dance floor, how often her laughter rang out. She seemed to have integrated seamlessly into the community that had taken him years to gain acceptance from, despite being born there. When the band began playing a waltz, Ethan set down his punch cup and crossed the room with determined strides. He reached Olivia just as the blacksmith's son was about to ask her to dance. Miss Caldwell, Ethan said, tipping his head slightly, may I have this dance? Surprise and pleasure flashed across her face. Mr. O'Brien. I didn't know you were here. I've been keeping to the shadows, he admitted, offering his hand. She placed her gloved hand in his, and he led her to the dance floor. As they began to waltz, Ethan was acutely aware of her closeness, the light floral scent of her perfume, the warmth of her hand in his. "I hear you've tamed the shepherd boys," he said, searching for neutral conversation. "Quite an achievement." Olivia smiled. "They're not so wild, just bored and in need of attention. Once I gave them responsibilities in the classroom, they settled right down." "The whole town is impressed with you," Ethan observed. "And you, are you impressed, Mr. O'Brien?" There was a teasing quality to her voice that he found both unsettling and appealing. He hesitated, surprised. Thornville isn't an easy place for newcomers. "Perhaps I don't seem like much of a newcomer anymore," she suggested. 6 weeks can be a lifetime on the frontier." The waltz ended, and Ethan reluctantly released her. "You seem happy here." "I am," she confirmed, though something in her expression hinted at complexity beneath her words. "Will you stay for the supper? I brought apple pie, Mrs. Fletcher gave me her recipe." The mention of his housekeeper reminded Ethan of his responsibilities. "I should get back to the ranch." Disappointment clouded Olivia's features momentarily before she recovered with a polite smile. "Of course, your work never ends, does it?" "That's ranching," he said with a shrug. "Good evening, Miss Caldwell." As he drove home under a canopy of stars, Ethan replayed their dance in his mind, wishing he'd found the courage to stay longer to talk with her properly. But what would be the point? Their worlds were too different. She was educated, cultured, a woman who read books and taught children, who laughed easily and made friends wherever she went. He was just a rancher, more comfortable with cattle than conversation. Yet over the next few months, Ethan found himself inventing reasons to visit Thornville with increasing frequency. He needed supplies that could only be purchased at the general store. He had business with the bank that couldn't wait. The blacksmith at Whispering Pine couldn't repair a particular tool. Each time he contrived to pass by the schoolhouse, timing his visits to coincide with the end of the school day. Sometimes he only caught a glimpse of Olivia dismissing her students or sweeping the schoolhouse steps. Other times she noticed him and they exchanged pleasantries, brief conversations that left him wanting more. Spring arrived, turning the landscape lush and green. On a mild April afternoon, Ethan was leaving the general store when he spotted Olivia struggling with several large books and a basket. "Let me help you with those," he offered, taking the books before she could protest. "Thank you," she said, adjusting her grip on the basket. "These are new readers for the older students." The school board finally approved my request. They walked together toward the schoolhouse, their pace unhurried. "How many students do you have now?" Ethan asked. 23, Olivia replied proudly. 3 new families moved to town last month. I'm hoping the board will approve an assistant teacher by fall." "The town's growing," Ethan observed. "The railroad will reach us by next year." "Progress comes whether we want it or not," Olivia said thoughtfully. "Though I confess I like Thornville just as it is." They had reached the schoolhouse. Ethan set the books on the porch steps, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Would you?" he began awkwardly. "That is, I wonder if you might like to have dinner at Whispering Pine sometime. Mrs. Fletcher often says she misses your company." Olivia's smile was radiant. "I would like that very much, both to see Mrs. Fletcher and your company as well." "Sunday," Ethan suggested, his heart racing unexpectedly. "I could pick you up after church." "Sunday would be perfect." That Sunday dinner became the first of many. Throughout the spring and into summer, Ethan invited Olivia to Whispering Pine every few weeks. Mrs. Fletcher, delighted to have female company, always prepared elaborate meals and found excuses to leave them alone together afterward. They developed a routine. After dinner, they would walk the grounds of the ranch, talking about everything from books to ranching techniques. Olivia proved to be not just educated but curious, asking intelligent questions about cattle breeding and water management. Ethan found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone about his hopes for expanding the ranch, experimenting with new breeds, even the loneliness he sometimes felt as the sole guardian of his family's legacy. In turn, he learned about Olivia's life in Philadelphia, her love of teaching, and her decision to come west. Though she spoke freely of her childhood and education, Ethan noticed she rarely mentioned the immediate years before her arrival in Wyoming. Whenever the conversation turned that way, she would deftly change the subject. One warm evening in late June, They sat on the porch swing after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in vibrant orange and pink. Ethan had just finished telling her about his plans to buy the neighboring property when it went up for sale next month. "You have a vision for this place," Olivia observed. "Your father would be proud." Ethan smiled slightly. "Maybe. He was a hard man to please." "Tell me about him," she encouraged. "You rarely speak of your parents." Ethan was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father came here with nothing but determination. He built this ranch through sheer force of will, working from dawn until midnight, never taking a day off. He expected the same from everyone around him, including my mother and me." "That sounds difficult for a child." "I was never allowed to be a child," Ethan admitted. "By 8, I was doing a man's work. By 15, I was managing ranch hands. When my parents died, I stepped into my father's boots without missing a beat because that's what I'd been trained to do." Olivia's hand found his on the swing between them. "And your mother?" "She was gentle but strong in her own way. She never complained about the hardships. She taught me to read by lamplight after the day's work was done." Ethan's voice softened with memory. "She loved wildflowers. Every spring, she would plant them along the path to the house, though my father thought it was a waste of time." "Is that why you maintain the flower beds?" Olivia asked, gesturing to the colorful blooms bordering the porch. Ethan nodded. "Mrs. Fletcher does most of the work, but yes, I keep them for my mother's memory." They fell into comfortable silence, their hands still touching lightly between them. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I should take you back to town," Ethan said reluctantly. "It's getting late." "Yes, I suppose you should." Olivia stood, smoothing her skirts. "Thank you for another lovely evening." As they drove back to Thornville, the warm summer air carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Neither spoke much, content in each other's company. When they reached her cabin, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "Good night, Olivia," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. For a moment he thought about kissing her, but caution held him back. Instead, he watched until she was safely inside before turning the wagon toward home. The following weeks brought a heatwave that tested both ranchers and townspeople. Ethan worked tirelessly to ensure his cattle had access to water, often spending entire days in the saddle under the merciless sun. Despite the demands of the ranch, he still made time to see Olivia, now looking forward to their meetings with an eagerness that both confused and exhilarated him. In late July, Thornville held its annual Independence Day celebration, delayed by 2 weeks due to the mayor's illness. The festivities included a picnic in the town square, games for the children, and dancing in the evening. Ethan arrived early, hoping to secure time with Olivia before she was surrounded by admirers. He found her organizing a 3-legged race for her students, her cheeks flushed with heat and excitement. She wore a light summer dress of blue cotton, her auburn hair tied back with a matching ribbon. When she spotted him, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "You came. I wasn't sure if you would, with the drought and all." "The cattle can survive without me for one afternoon," he replied, returning her smile. "Need help with your race." Together they tied children's legs together with strips of cloth, laughing at their attempts to coordinate. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did in public, drawn out of his usual reserve by Olivia's infectious enthusiasm. After the races, they joined other townspeople for the picnic lunch. Ethan noticed several people watching them with undisguised interest, and realized with a start that his attention to Olivia had not gone unnoticed by the community. "People are talking about us," he murmured as they found a spot under a large oak tree. Olivia glanced around, then shrugged. "People always talk, it's what they do in small towns." "Does it bother you?" "Should it?" she countered, her green eyes challenging. Ethan considered this. "I suppose not unless they're saying things that might damage your reputation as a teacher." Olivia laughed softly. "The school board is quite pleased with me, Ethan. 23 students who couldn't wait for summer to end so they could return to school. I don't think my friendship with a respected rancher will change that." Friendship, the word both comforted and disappointed him. Was that all she felt, just friendship? As the day progressed, they participated in various activities. Ethan won the shooting contest, while Olivia judged the pie-baking competition. When evening fell and the dancing began, they naturally gravitated toward each other. This time, dancing with Olivia felt different, more significant. Her hand in his seemed to belong there, and when he placed his other hand at her waist, the connection between them was almost tangible. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years. "You're much improved since Founder's Day," she teased. "I've had good reason to practice," he replied, surprising himself with his boldness. Olivia's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. "And what reason is that?" Before Ethan could answer, a commotion at the edge of the dance floor interrupted them. A man was arguing loudly with the sheriff, his words slurred with drink. Though the stranger wore respectable clothes, his disheveled appearance and red face suggested he'd been drinking heavily. "I know she's here," the man shouted, pushing past the sheriff. Olivia Caldwell." Ethan felt Olivia stiffen in his arms. The color drained from her face as she stared at the intruder. "Olivia," Ethan asked quietly, concerned by her reaction, "do you know that man?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes wide with what could only be described as fear. That's James Harrington. My former fiancé." The word fiancé hit Ethan like a physical blow. In all their conversations, Olivia had never mentioned being engaged. The man spotted them and lurched forward, pointing an accusatory finger. "There you are. Did you think you could just run away, humiliate me in front of the entire city?" Sheriff Taylor grabbed Harrington's arm. "That's enough, mister. You're disturbing the peace." "Peace?" Harrington laughed bitterly. "Ask her about peace. Ask her about the wedding she abandoned. Ask her about the money she took." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people turned to stare at Olivia, who had gone completely pale. "That's not true," she whispered, though only Ethan could hear her. "Miss Caldwell is a respected member of this community," the sheriff said firmly. "Whatever grievance you have can be discussed soberly tomorrow. Tonight, you're coming with me." As the sheriff began leading the protesting man away, Harrington broke free long enough to shout, "She's a liar and a thief. She stole my grandmother's jewelry before she ran off, $5,000 worth." The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Ethan looked at Olivia, whose eyes had filled with tears. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please." Without hesitation, Ethan guided her through the stunned crowd to his waiting wagon. Once they were clear of the town, he turned to her. "Are you all right?" "No," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Nothing is all right." "Do you want to talk about it?" Olivia stared at the darkened landscape for several long moments before speaking. "I was engaged to James in Philadelphia. He comes from a wealthy family, and the match was considered advantageous by everyone, including my father." She paused, gathering her thoughts. At first, James was charming, attentive. But as the wedding approached, I began to see another side of him. He was controlling, possessive. He would fly into rages over small things. If I spoke to another man, if I expressed an opinion different from his, if I wasn't where he expected me to be. Ethan listened silently, his hands tight on the reins. 3 days before the wedding, he became furious because I'd spent the afternoon with my friend instead of finalizing flower arrangements. Her voice faltered, he struck me. Hard enough to leave a bruise. Anger flared in Ethan's chest. "Did you tell anyone?" "My father," Olivia said bitterly. "He told me all men lose their temper occasionally, and that I should learn to be more obedient if I wanted a peaceful marriage." "So you ran," Ethan concluded. Olivia nodded. "I took what money I had saved from teaching piano lessons and bought a ticket west. I didn't steal anything. That's a lie he invented to discredit me, to justify his pursuit." They had reached her cabin. Ethan set the brake and turned to face her fully. "I believe you, Olivia." Her eyes searched his face. "Do you, even after everything he said?" "I know you," Ethan said simply. "You're not a thief." Relief washed over her features, followed by fresh concern. "But the town, my students, their parents, they heard his accusations." "We'll deal with that tomorrow," Ethan promised. "For now, let's get you safely inside." He walked her to the door, acutely aware that her reputation, and perhaps her position, hung in the balance. As she unlocked the door, Olivia turned to him. "Thank you for believing me," she said softly. It means more than you know. Ethan reached out to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. Get some rest. I'll come by in the morning. True to his word, Ethan arrived at Olivia's cabin early the next day. He found her sitting on the front steps, her face pale but composed. The school board is meeting this afternoon, she said without preamble, to discuss my future in light of last night's incident. Ethan sat beside her. What can I do? Nothing, I'm afraid. Mrs. Wilson stopped by earlier to warn me. Apparently, Mr. Harrington is staying at the hotel and has been telling anyone who will listen about my crimes in Philadelphia. Have you spoken with Sheriff Taylor? Yes. He's sympathetic but says without evidence it's my word against James's. Olivia sighed heavily. Even if the board believes me, the damage is done. Parents won't want a teacher with a cloud over her head. Then we'll find the evidence, Ethan declared, standing up. Where would this Harrington be now? Probably still at the hotel. Ethan, what are you planning? I'm going to have a conversation with your former fiancé, he said grimly, man to man. Olivia caught his arm. No. James is dangerous when he's angry, and besides, confronting him will only make things worse. I won't confront him, Ethan assured her, though the temptation was strong. But I need to understand what we're dealing with. At the Thornville Hotel, Ethan found James Harrington in the dining room, nursing a cup of coffee and looking considerably worse for wear. Without invitation, Ethan sat down across from him. Mr. Harrington, I'm Ethan O'Brien. The man looked up with bloodshot eyes, the cowboy she was dancing with, come to defend her honor. I've come to understand the situation, Ethan replied evenly. You've made serious accusations against a woman who's earned the respect of this community. Harrington laughed bitterly. She fooled you too, then. Olivia has always been good at making people believe what she wants them to believe. What exactly did she steal from you? My grandmother's diamond and sapphire necklace. Family heirloom worth $5,000 if it's worth a penny. Harrington took a swig of coffee, disappeared the same day she did. And you're sure she took it? No one else had access. It was in my safe. Only Olivia and I knew the combination. Harrington leaned forward. Look, O'Brien, I don't know what she's told you, but Olivia Caldwell is not the innocent schoolteacher she pretends to be. She agreed to marry me, accepted my family's hospitality, wore our jewelry, then ran off when the responsibilities of becoming a Harrington became too real for her. Ethan studied the man carefully. There was something rehearsed about his story, a polished quality that raised Ethan's suspicions. If you're so certain she stole from you, why not have her arrested? Ethan asked. Why follow her all the way to Wyoming? A flash of something, calculation, perhaps, crossed Harrington's face before he replied. The scandal would harm my family's reputation. I'd prefer to handle this privately. If she returns the necklace, I'm willing to forget the whole affair. And if she doesn't have it? She has it, Harrington insisted, or she sold it. Either way, she owes me $5,000. Ethan stood, having heard enough. The school board meets at 3. I assume you'll be there to repeat your accusations. Wouldn't miss it, Harrington replied with a smirk. Though if Olivia were wise, she'd speak with me privately before then. We might come to an arrangement that would allow her to keep her precious teaching position. Back at Olivia's cabin, Ethan recounted his conversation. He's lying, he concluded. I'm not sure about what exactly, but something doesn't add up. It doesn't matter, Olivia said dejectedly. His word against mine, and he's a wealthy man from a prominent Philadelphia family. Who would the board believe? Me, Ethan said firmly. They'll believe me when I tell them that James Harrington tried to blackmail you this morning. Hope flickered briefly in Olivia's eyes before doubt returned. Even so, the rumors. We need more than my testimony, Ethan agreed. We need to understand what really happened to that necklace. I never even saw it, Olivia insisted. James mentioned his grandmother's jewelry, but he kept it in a safe at his home. I certainly never had the combination. Ethan paced the small confines of her cabin, thinking, there must be someone in Philadelphia who knows the truth. Someone who might have witnessed something or heard something. My friend Charlotte, Olivia said suddenly. She was my closest confidant. She never liked James, said he reminded her of her brother-in-law who, she trailed off, eyes widening. Her brother-in-law who gambled away her sister's dowry. You think Harrington has gambling debts? It would explain why he needs money so desperately, Olivia reasoned. And why he's so insistent that I took something valuable. Could you telegraph Charlotte, ask if she's heard anything about Harrington's finances? Olivia nodded. I can try. But even if she confirms it, how does that prove I didn't take the necklace? One step at a time, Ethan said, heading for the door. Send that telegram. I'll meet you at the school board meeting. The Thornville town hall was packed when Ethan arrived that afternoon. News of the scandal had spread quickly, drawing curious onlookers along with concerned parents. The 5 members of the school board sat at a table at the front of the room, with Olivia seated alone before them. James Harrington was already there, standing confidently to one side. He nodded smugly at Ethan, clearly believing victory was within his grasp. Mayor Thompson, who served as chairman of the school board, called the meeting to order. We're here to address serious allegations that have been made against Miss Caldwell, our schoolteacher. Mr. Harrington, since you've brought these charges, please state your case. Harrington stepped forward, assuming an expression of regretful dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, I take no pleasure in this task. Olivia Caldwell and I were engaged to be married in Philadelphia. 3 days before our wedding, she disappeared, along with a valuable family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond and sapphire necklace worth $5,000. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've spent months searching for her, not out of vengeance, but to recover what rightfully belongs to my family, Harrington continued smoothly. I have no desire to see Miss Caldwell imprisoned. I simply want what is mine returned. Mayor Thompson turned to Olivia. Miss Caldwell, how do you respond to these allegations? Olivia stood, her back straight despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. I did leave Philadelphia 3 days before our planned wedding, that much is true. But I took nothing except my own belongings and what money I had earned teaching music. I left because, she hesitated briefly, because I discovered Mr. Harrington was not the gentleman he appeared to be. She's lying, Harrington interrupted. Our engagement ended because I discovered her theft. Mr. Harrington, you'll have your chance to respond, Mayor Thompson said firmly. Continue, Miss Caldwell. I never saw the necklace, Mr. Harrington describes, Olivia stated clearly. I never had access to his safe, nor did I know its combination, as he claims. I believe Mr. Harrington is using me as a scapegoat for the necklace's disappearance because the truth would be far more damaging to his reputation. Harrington's face darkened with anger. This is absurd. Are you going to take the word of this fortune hunter over a member of one of Philadelphia's oldest families? I think, Ethan said, standing up from his seat, that we should consider all the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Mr. O'Brien, Mayor Thompson acknowledged, do you have something to contribute? I do. Ethan moved to stand beside Olivia. This morning, Mr. Harrington suggested to me that if Miss Caldwell met with him privately before this hearing, he might be willing to come to an arrangement that would allow her to keep her teaching position. That sounds like blackmail to me. Fresh murmurs spread through the room. Harrington's face flushed. That's a complete fabrication. Furthermore, Ethan continued, Miss Caldwell has sent a telegram to Philadelphia to a friend who might shed light on Mr. Harrington's true motivations. As if on cue, the telegraph operator hurried into the hall, waving a yellow paper. Message for Miss Caldwell just came through. Mayor Thompson accepted the telegram and handed it to Olivia, who read it quickly, her eyes widening. What does it say? He prompted. Olivia cleared her throat. James Harrington's gambling debts exceed $10,000. Stop. Family threatening disinheritance. Stop. Grandmother's necklace reported stolen to insurance company 1 week before your departure. Stop. Police investigating Harrington. Not you. Stop. Charlotte. A shocked silence fell over the room. That's preposterous, Harrington spluttered. That woman has always disliked me. She's lying to protect her friend. Is she? Sheriff Taylor asked, emerging from the back of the room. Because I just received a telegram myself from the Philadelphia Police Department. Seems they've been looking for you, Harrington. Insurance fraud is a serious crime. The color drained from Harrington's face. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain. You can explain to the authorities in Philadelphia, the sheriff interrupted. I'm holding you until they send someone to escort you back east. As Harrington was led away, protesting loudly, the tension in the room dissolved into excited chatter. Olivia stood frozen, as if unable to believe the sudden turn of events. Mayor Thompson rapped his gavel for order. In light of this evidence, I believe we can consider the allegations against Miss Caldwell disproven. Unless any board member objects, I move that we formally express our continued confidence in her as Thornville's teacher. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, townspeople approached Olivia to offer support and apologies for having doubted her. Mrs. Wilson hugged her tearfully, while parents assured her they would never consider removing their children from her classroom. Through it all, Ethan remained by her side, a steady presence as the tide of public opinion turned decisively in her favor. When the last well-wisher had departed, Olivia turned to him with eyes shining with unshed tears. "How can I ever thank you?" she asked softly. "You don't need to thank me," Ethan replied. "I'm just glad the truth came out." They walked together in the fading afternoon light, neither speaking until they reached Olivia's cabin. "Would you like to come in for tea?" she offered. Inside, as Olivia prepared the tea, Ethan watched her movements, the graceful efficiency, the quiet strength that had carried her through the ordeal. Something had shifted between them today, a deepening of trust and understanding. "I was afraid," Olivia admitted as they sat at her small table, "that you might believe him." "Never," Ethan said firmly. "I know you, Olivia. I've seen your character and how you teach your students, how you help your neighbors, how you faced hardship with dignity." She smiled, relief and something warmer lighting her eyes. "When I came west, I was running from something. I never expected to find something worth running toward." The meaning behind her words was unmistakable. Ethan reached across the table to take her hand. "I've spent my life believing that a rancher stands alone," he said quietly. "That showing attachment is weakness. My father taught me that the land and the work are all that matter." He paused, gathering courage. "But these past months with you have shown me how wrong that is." "Ethan, please let me finish." He tightened his hold on her hand. "I don't want to stand alone anymore, Olivia. When I'm with you, everything makes more sense. The work has purpose beyond mere survival. The land seems more beautiful because I'm seeing it through your eyes." Olivia's face softened with emotion. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Ethan declared simply. "I think I have since that first day when you arrived half frozen on my doorstep." "I love you too," she whispered, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "I was beginning to think you'd never say it." Ethan stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, a question asked and answered in the press of lips. The second was deeper, a promise sealed between them. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Olivia. Come live at Whispering Pine. We'll build a life together." "Yes," she breathed, her arms tightening around his neck. "Oh, yes." They were married in September, when the aspen leaves had turned to gold against the evergreen hillsides. The ceremony took place at Whispering Pine, with the entire town in attendance. Olivia wore a simple gown of ivory satin with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, the same flowers Ethan's mother had loved. Mrs. Fletcher cried throughout the ceremony, later claiming they were tears of relief that boy finally found someone to love besides those blasted cattle. After a brief honeymoon to Denver, they returned to the ranch, where Olivia continued teaching at the schoolhouse Ethan built on their property. Within a year, children from neighboring ranches were riding for miles to attend Mrs. O'Brien's school, drawn by her reputation for kindness and excellence. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, Ethan marveled at how completely his life had transformed. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "About how the most valuable thing I ever found in a blizzard wasn't cattle or land," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "It was you." Olivia smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "Well, come spring, we'll have one more valuable thing to add to the ranch." Ethan's eyes widened as the meaning of her gesture registered. "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "In April, Dr. Miller says." Joy unlike anything he'd ever known surged through Ethan as he gathered his wife in his arms. The ranch that had once been merely his responsibility, his duty, had become truly his home, filled with love, laughter, and now, the promise of new life. "I used to think a man needs nothing but his land and his own two hands," Ethan murmured against Olivia's hair. "I've never been so happy to be wrong." As darkness settled over Whispering Pine Ranch, the lights from the windows cast a warm glow across the yard where Ethan's mother's wildflowers swayed in the gentle evening breeze. A fitting symbol of how love had transformed the once solitary rancher's life, bringing color and beauty where before there had been only purpose and duty. In taking in a stranger that snowy winter day, Ethan O'Brien had found far more than he'd ever dreamed possible. Not just shelter from the storm, but a heart to match his own and a future bright with promise.